Well, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Peter Buttigieg has officially announced his 2020 presidential bid. Despite entering a crowded field, the mayor is forging ahead, working to send his message of generational change. But would he make a good president? Joining us now is George and Francis Ball, Distinguished Professor of Economics, Michael Hicks. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, you are the person to ask about this because you have visited, you have studied, you have written about South Bend for more than a decade. What has Buttigieg done for the city of South Bend in order to make it on a road to recovery?
Well, so I can talk about his mayoral experience, not his presidential experience. But yeah, I think there are three things that Mayor Buttigieg has done in South Bend that are sort of salient to the issue of his leadership. The first one is he's convinced a very old Rust Belt town that it needs to think differently about its future. And the example of that is talking about the Studebaker plant, which closed down more than 50 years ago and lived on in the hearts and minds of many people who were looking for transformation. The second thing that he's done is actually take on the hard business of urban renewal, bulldozing bulldozing decrepit buildings, those sorts of things, which are very politically fraught activities. And then the third, and maybe the most difficult to pin data to, but it's certainly obvious, is he's been able to mobilize an awful lot of people to participate in public discourse and into civic life. And he does that by bringing people in without excluding anyone. And I think that's an unusual experience.
The big question here is, I mean, he has been a catalyst for much needed change in South Bend over the last couple of years, but will he be able to transition that to a national stage, do you think?
I'm not sure. The point that I was trying to make as I've talked about his experience is that he's only been mayor for 6-7 years. Very difficult to look at the aggregate data about GDP growth, per capita income, population growth, and say, you know, the city is recovering, but he's laid the groundwork for it. But the skills that he would bring, that any mayor who's been successful anywhere in a Rust Belt town would bring, would be the capacity to confront hard issues, to change people's minds, and again, the ability to convince folks to follow you without excluding other people is sort of refreshing. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's been popular both in South Bend, but also amongst people who are just learning how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's always a tough one here. But I mean, Professor, just going back to the fact that, I mean, he's provided just a blueprint for other troubled towns in the Rust Belt, other Rust Belt towns that are having similar issues to South Bend, just what they need to do in order to get their cities, their towns back on the right path.
Right, and that blueprint has been followed by others. There are other successful Rust Belt towns, Kokomo, for example, but taking to the national stage the notion that there are fundamental transformations that have to occur in the economy. We have to do better with educating households so that they can adapt to automation instead of simply reacting to the challenges of automation and offshoring and crying for a backward move. I mean, I think that point that he makes quite frequently as he talks about automation is that we at the local level are the ones that have to make a difference. There's potentially a federal role. That's a harder sell, I think. But in terms of what you see actually happening in South Bend, after 50 or more years of economic and demographic decline, the fact that the population is stabilizing and you have such broad interest in civic life, which I think is a big turnaround, sort of talks about his capacity to lead, at least at the electoral level. The other nuts and bolts issues are going to be far more difficult.
Yeah, it certainly does look like he has a track record to prove it. Since 2012, South Bend area has added more than 10,000 jobs. Unemployment rate fell from 11.8% to 4.4%. So he certainly has the city at least trending in the right direction.
Well, I mean, and the point I want to make is that even if you look at the things that are good about South Bend, or if you challenge with the elements of South Bend that maybe are not yet showing results, what that misses is that it's a 20, 30-year turnaround for many of the Rust Belt cities and states. And so the things that you have to do to get to that 20-year turnaround are often not very politically popular. Bulldozing 1,000 decrepit, abandoned homes is only popular with a few local residents. It doesn't have a broad suite of popularity. And so to have a candidate who is attacking the unpopular but necessary parts of public policy, I think is emblematic of what mayors do around the country. And I think why people who would like to see politics of focusing on problems are enamored of his announcement.
It certainly will be a story that we will continue to watch as we head towards the 2020 presidential race. Michael Hicks, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.